The Joyful Friar podcast is made possible by the generous support of our friends. To support the podcast, please visit nathan-castle.com and donate today.
Hello and welcome to this episode of the Joyful Friar podcast. I'm Father Nathan Castle, your host, today joined by Karen, one of my most stalwart prayer partners. I thought about Karen for this episode because of all of the many of these, hundreds of these that I've been a part of. This one stands out to me as evoking the most compassion from the person who helped them cross. Karen is a counselor, and so she already has a heart for wounded folk who have been through some sort of heartbreak. And you could feel that in the initial crossing. And I don't know, do you remember whether you were involved in the permission asking one as well?
I was.
Yeah, so Karen's been in conversation with Ellen both times that we spoke with her. You might recall that Ellen showed us in a dream. She appeared to me to be late 40s, early 50s. Something about her, I only saw her face, but she appeared to be a wealthy woman to me. There's something about her bearing that suggested wealth. We learned, sadly, she was being sexually assaulted in the dream, but she made people are so good to me with when they have to bring something awful like that. They don't give me a nightmare. They somehow buffer it and get the basic data across without inflaming all of my fears or passions or whatever. So she she went through an assault that we learned happened in her home. She had been in a long marriage, a more than 30-year marriage. She and her husband had raised two children to adulthood, and they were beginning to talk about how they might do the next chapter of their lives as empty nesters. Most of their social circle was at a country club where they lived. And then she began to hear rumors that there might be an affair going on. She simply called her husband on it and said, "Is it true?" And he said, "Yes, it is." That ended up ultimately was the end of the marriage. And she kept being encouraged by uh, friends, associates, even her kids about getting back out there in circulation. She had no real interest in dating. She had been faithful to a husband for 30 years, and just the idea of going on a date just didn't sit well with her at all. But she did take an interest in a gentleman that turned out to not be a gentleman at all, but whom she invited into her home for a dinner. She thought she could do something more casual. She loved her home and kept a nice home, and just was planning to have a cordial dinner with a man whom she invited, and it turned into awfulness. That's the basic story. But her response to it was never speaking of it to anyone ever, and kind of trying to bury the whole thing. And it ended up really being life altering in lots of ways, as so often happens when something traumatic doesn't really get dealt with in the light of truth. So with that, I thought that gives the basic background of it, unless you want to add something to that before you have any comment on it.
No, you got
Okay.
it.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, then I know that it evoked compassion in you. So could you tell
Mhm.
us some of how that moved in you?
You know, I think I met Ellen in 22, early 22, and Dave was my prayer partner. I think Dave and I did this one together with you.
Okay.
And then we got Ellen's permission in like July of 23. And then Ellen showed up just a couple months ago to help somebody else cross. So Ellen, I think, is very close to you, and she's stayed close to me. And her story was really sad to me, but also very uplifting. Of course, what happened to Ellen was tragic and horrible. Uh, but what was really touching to me was her mom, who had died when Ellen was very young, kind of in her 20s before she even had children. Her mom came and was backlit, and the light shone through her. And her mom just said to her, I'm here to turn the light back on inside you. I'm here to help you do that. Because we know, you and I know that you kind of have to do that one for yourself. They can lead you to it,
Sure.
whether it's the guardian or a different angel or another helper, but we kind of have to do the work. And so Ellen did the work, but it was her mom that came and helped her heal. And then when she came last time, a couple months ago, to help another gal who had been through a very similar experience, I just knew Ellen would be there while we were talking to this other woman, young woman. And there she was. Ellen was there to help out in her crossing. So Ellen has stayed close to me. And she also was very instrumental in Dave and I kind of figuring out the prayer partner thing, because the day that we did the crossing with Ellen, I couldn't like shake it. It stayed heavy on me. And I know it was such a happy ending and always is. It was what was hard about it was the sad part stayed with me, and that's not normally what happens with me. So Dave and I kind of developed a pattern where if either of us have that happen, then we just stop everything and call each other and just talk it out. And when we do that, it has always worked out, and then we move on with our day. It would be a little bit like if you had the dream and you couldn't fall back to sleep,
Yeah.
and that just doesn't happen. So Dave and I, because of Ellen, Dave and I got a better method of how to do this work.
I can never remember. I don't know how many times I've asked you, what kind of counselor are you? Professionally, I mean.
So I'm a psychoanalyst. I did a marriage and family therapy degree at Fuller Seminary, and then I did institute training in psychoanalysis. And you can call me a counselor; it's totally fine.
I couldn't
But
possibly repeat all of what you just said, so I think counselor is going to have to
yeah,
be.
that works. It works.
But the reason I'm bringing it up is because you hear people's sorrows day in and day out, all day long. Um, I'm assuming that they don't all stick with you that way.
No, they don't. They don't. And that's what, and you know me, father knows me, I'm addicted to pickleball. So I was at the pickleball court ready to get out there, and I still felt it. And so usually that'll, being around friends and hitting that plastic ball pretty hard, it usually kind of like restarts, refocuses me and restarts. Didn't happen that time. And I was trying to figure out, I was thinking a lot about it before we met this morning, like why that happened, because I've gotten really a lot better over the 40 years I've been doing the work I do, how to, separate a little. And I think it was that what happened to Ellen was so tragic, but her not talking about it with anybody. And then anytime a therapist would get close to it, she would quit and go to somebody else. Um, I've been on the other side of that, right? And so um, it was like she imprisoned herself. And that made me really sad for her and for all the clients that I've seen where, I've helped and haven't helped, or, people they give you what they give you and you work with what they give you. And it's that way in the afterlife too. But what was so hopeful and ended up being really redemption for me is that even though Ellen didn't work on it in this realm, she was able to do it with her mom in a loving, compassionate relationship. And she was able to get healed in the afterlife, which means, okay, we can do our best here, the best we can, but we
Yeah.
still get to work on it and get healed later on.
I'm going to be at a funeral in a couple of hours. And of course, when I was in active ministry as a pastor, there was probably a funeral at least every 10 days or so, every couple of weeks. So I was often around um, recent death and the accompanying grief. To me, it's so important to be able to imagine a vivid sense of afterlife where this can still happen, because otherwise people uh, kick themselves that they never said the thing they ought to have said. They never forgave, or they never
Mhm.
forgot, or they never got to a peaceful place. And sometimes they feel that now all is lost. I'll never again, whatever. And I try to suggest to people that that's not a fact in evidence. You you don't know that for sure. That can be a powerful thought that saddens and can affect your future, but you don't know that for with all certitude. So make room, even if you're not a believer in the continuation of consciousness and all that comes with it, the possibility of reunions and healing like Ellen experienced. Hold out a space. You remember, Ellen was not a religious person, and neither was her
No,
mother.
no.
And partly when the affair broke up her marriage, one of the things she told us was she didn't have a network other than the country club friends that she and her husband had together. She said they were pretty good at there weren't very many divorces in their set, but when there was one, I think she used the word absorbed, that the group kind of absorbed it and went on.
Yeah, yeah.
And she didn't, but she did mention there was a kind of who gets custody of the friends, or which friend after a divorce.
Mhm.
That's pretty common. I've been on the receiving end of that when friends of mine have divorced. But she she didn't really have a deep system of loving friendships to fall back on. And she
Mhm.
wasn't very good with her own kids about being forthright. So she just lived at a much lower level after that.
Yeah, we talked about that with her, how she just isolated herself. Even if she would go to lunch with friends or whatever, you could tell she was just insular.
Yes,
And um, and also the other thing that really touched me is that she admitted how irritable she was.
yes.
And I know irritability, maybe you do. I've never been the recipient of yours,
I've
but
heard of it before. I don't know that I've ever been irritated.
right. But I work with people who are very, prickly and irritable. And it's all because of their pain. And a lot of people are turned off by it and they don't approach again
Yes,
because they don't want to get their head bit off or
right.
whatever that irritability does. But uh, Ellen is so articulate and so honest and then so steady that any question I asked her, or she was just forthright and she just dealt with it. And she kind of reminded me of Mother Mary. When Mother Mary has come, she's just really straightforward.
Yes.
So that was something else about Ellen that I really liked.
She was articulated. If you remember, in book three, the subtitle is "Please Let Me Explain." And we
Mhm.
were looking for stories to include in that volume. We were looking for articulate people,
Mhm.
where especially not just because of their wordcraft, but because they turned us onto an idea that expanded our understanding of what afterlife could be like.
Yeah.
I really liked, because I was an art student and still have an artistic kind of view of the world. Um, she talked about having her home very orderly and just the way she liked it. It didn't sound like it was obsessive, but just focused. It sounded like if you were in her home, you would admire her surroundings. And then she mentioned a piece of framed art on the wall that might be a little tilted. a little askew. And she said, before, I would straighten it because I wanted it to be harmonious. After that event, she felt so disordered inside that she insisted that her surroundings be orderly, and she was annoyed if they weren't.
Right.
So she would straighten the picture, not so that there would be harmony, but because she was angry at it.
Yeah.
She was annoyed that it was crooked and had to get it set right.
Yeah. And she said that the irritability was healed too in the
Yes.
afterlife, which
Yeah.
I thought was really cool. I wanted to ask you a question because Ellen's story, you could tell that she had maybe not told her story that many times by the time she came to us. Like you mentioned, she might have been on the low level of ready
Yeah.
to cross. And I know you don't care for it if people are super emotional or anything like that. So, like, what was it like for you when she was inhabiting,
I
your
just
voice?
I've let it be known, and I think the angels, whatever our PR people on the other side are, they describe what it's like to work with us, and before they do, so they
Mhm.
have the option of choosing something else if they want to. The line I draw is no crying inside me.
Yeah.
Uh, I'm not much of a crier of my own tears, and I don't want to cry other people's tears inside my body. Uh, I don't have very many rules, but that's one.
Yeah.
And she was on the cusp of that, and she gathered herself. And of
Hmm.
course, it's good that she could cry because she had withheld a lot of strong emotion for so long. That was part of the problem, large part of the problem.
All right.
But um,
But you could feel her close to it, and then
I
you could,
could, I
and then
could.
she gathered it. Hmm.
But I also knew that it was taking a lot of courage for a woman to speak to a man about assault. Um,
Yeah.
so but she did that. And
Yes.
she might not have told that story many times, but she had at least gotten it out.
Mhm.
And don't you think that first time is the hardest?
For sure. Yeah.
So,
Right. The amount of courage it takes is insurmountable,
yeah.
almost.
Um,
Well, and Saint Cecilia came too, and she was the one who introduced, Ellen to us, and she was very interesting too. And her life was, filled with uh, other people making decisions for her and her pushing back.
yeah,
And
she was martyred in the end.
yeah,
She was the victim of an assault that killed her. Especially Christian people who are not used to addressing in prayer or including in prayer one of the saints.
right.
Catholic people call that having a devotion to
Mhm.
a saint.
Hmm.
That which just means having a love for them, but a love for them that grows into a relationship of repeated um, interaction, even if it feels like you're only talking to the wall. I mean, people don't necessarily hear back from the saint that they include in their prayer, but they benefit somehow by not praying in isolation, but calling upon a saint that they have an affinity for. I learned a long time ago that sometimes that affinity is because it's being sent to you. It's not just emotions welling up inside you.
Mhm.
It's you're receiving energetic love from one of the saints that you're responding to. So,
Huh. Wow.
yeah.
Can I tell you one more thing about uh, how Ellen touched me?
Yes, please.
Um, so I was close to my mom and dad before they passed in 2020 because I lived near them and was helping out quite a bit. And my mom and I had let's just say, it wasn't like poor relationship, but our personalities didn't, jive as well
Mhm.
as maybe her with my sister, or it was my dad and I were a little bit closer. But at the end of my mom's life, she was just so sweet, and we spent a lot of time together, and it covered over a multitude of hurts,
Yeah.
I have to admit. And I now, miss my mom immensely. And it was Ellen's relationship to her mom that really spoke to me, and I hold on to my relationship with my mom in a very special way. And so Ellen kind of, yeah, she helped me do that.
For people that are viewing or listening to this, one possibility to hold out hope for is if there's especially a parent relationship that doesn't look like it's ever going to heal this side of the grave. Um, Remember that in this uh, lifetime, you were both born into a role. Being someone's parent or being someone's child is a thing separate from each of the individuals in it. There's a structured role that involves being responsible for this kid until they're 18 and all the things that come with parenting. And many times there's several kids at once, and there's such busyness and bustle. And then when you mentioned with your own mother that maybe your temperaments were quite separate or different from
Mhm,
one another.
mhm.
There are all kind of reasons why we might have the warm ease of relating that we wish we did with someone. Sometimes you get to see that mellow, as you just explained.
Mhm,
Your mother was sweet as an elderly woman, and you as a caregiver,
mhm.
where you might not have called her sweet, 30 or 40 years earlier. Um, these things can change, and some of them can change in the afterlife. So I'd like to say to anyone who's listening, if you think all is lost and you'll just never, ever, ever have the relationship with mom or with dad that you wish you did, hold out the possibility that maybe you could be wrong. Because that person who might not be responsible for parenting you anymore in the afterlife, and who might be able to come to truths of their own that they just didn't realize, or they were able to make some changes afterwards that they couldn't make here or didn't make here. It's really possible to have different relations in a troubled relationship that can happen later on.
So good news.
It is good news. It is.
Yeah.
And if you remember when you threw a
Oh,
window,
tilt to one side.
yeah, see, you sometimes, when we take a photo anymore, you remember when we had to go to the drugstore and have the prints made, you'd be so disappointed when you got one that came back and it looks like everybody had a nice smile, but they were backlit. And so
Yeah.
they're dark. Now we just look at it on our phone and delete it and go to the next one. But she was backlit, but the light wasn't it. Maybe it was coming through her, or maybe some of it was being emitted from her.
Right.
um, and it reminded me of paintings of Easter, of the risen Christ with the wounds that are not covered over or utterly healed. They're there, but light is pouring through them, and they're no longer uh, something dark and nasty. They're a sign of resilience and a way of kind of incorporating everything that's a part of your story without feeling the need to delete anything. A very tragic event can be part of your story, but light can heal it, and it can be incorporated in a way that doesn't dominate or sadden any longer. It's just a detail, a thing that
Hmm.
happened. In the Catholic tradition, did you ever go to the Stations of the Cross, or at least
Hmm.
in a lot of Catholic churches, there are 14 particular scenes along the walls of the sides of the church. Sometimes they're in kind of plaster relief. Sometimes they're flat paintings, but most of the time they have some depth to them. And there are 14 scenes from the arrest of Jesus all the way to the burial. So it takes snapshots of the most horrible events of Good Friday. And I remember as a child going to Catholic school, we would all, on the Fridays of Lent, go to the Stations of the Cross. And it's focusing one's attention, even visually, on awful stuff. But it was
Yeah.
never to re-traumatize. It was to foster a sense of you are loved this much, that that this suffering can be endured out of love for you. that was kind of the way it was presented to us. And I appreciate that every moment of our lives is valued and precious to God. And of course, Ellen and her mother were not religious people, which makes the story, I think, even more rich because they weren't excluded from uh, all the goodness that can come later. They really just needed to face truth and
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
face it in a way that allowed it to heal. The truth will set you free.
Right. And the love that came through,
Yeah.
uh, and the compassion that Ellen was able to take in from her mom gave her the courage to heal, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One way this didn't go, which, might be part of her ongoing story, is she told us that her adult children only got what was left of her, that she was snappish and irritable and over controlling. She only interacted with them and with their children, her grandchildren, in ways that she could control. And she was good at that anyway because she had this orderly home and
Right.
calendars, I'm sure. And she could, when she knew they were coming, she'd reserve the hotel room, but they weren't going to be in her house. And they all understood after a while that when you visit her, that's the way it is. You're going to be at a hotel. She's going to arrange the dinner reservation and the trip to the zoo and all of it, but it's all going to be where she's sort of the cruise director, saying this is the way this visit is going to unfold. And if anybody tried to move away from the script, they were barked at.
Yeah.
So those children and grandchildren of hers, as far as we know, haven't yet gotten to know the healed version of her
Yeah.
or of her mother. And so there are joys that await when when that reunion happens and they get to see their mother or grandmother whole, happy, healthy, a saner version of her than she was able to present to them.
Yeah. More
Or
good news.
good news, yeah. And
Yeah. Yeah. I guess you probably read Henry Nouwen's work, you know, and he talks about how you have to stay in the pain for at least a little while in order to see what you have to learn.
yes,
And it's common that we want to avoid our pain. I don't know about you, but common for me. But I know that if I do, it gets worse and gets bigger
yes,
and then starts to have a life of its own.
right,
And that is really what happened with Ellen. She became a prisoner of the trauma that happened to her and everything afterwards. Uh, she had to be super controlled to manage. And so Ellen's a really good example of how you once you get the courage up to either share it, talk about it, face it, feel it, then you can move to the other side. And um, that's all hard work, but we get to either do it here or we're going to do it. We get to do it later.
amen, sister.
Yeah.
You and I are both the oldest we've ever been today. Uh, do you think you're wiser?
Oh,
Here's the
well,
here's the way that I'm really thinking. If you were wounded today by some action or word or something or event,
mhm.
and now you're in pain, are you even tempted to go towards ignoring it or stuffing it or any of that, or do you just face it head on right away because you've just been down this road too many times before?
Been down the road a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I what helps me is to talk it through with somebody who knows me, loves me, helps me understand things. Then I'm good. Once I do that, I have to talk about it with myself too to admit it, whatever it was. But then it always helps me to talk about it with somebody else, and then I'm pretty much I move along.
Mm. I think I do the same thing. Um, when I do experience hurt and pain, one temptation is to create a dramatic story where you're the victim. And many times we are because people
Yeah.
uh, do things they ought not do, and so do we.
Yeah.
But sometimes you're on the receiving end of something that was really unkind,
Mhm.
uh, and then you can take that and replay the scene and embroider it, embellish it, begin to ascribe other people's motives to why they said and did the thing they did, even something that might have a person might have hurt you innocently, but that
Mhm.
doesn't mean you can't create a story of how they intended to do it and enjoyed doing
Yeah.
it. So I've, you've met my friend Richard. He has a phrase that you're creating a dramatic story. That's
Yeah.
just, and if all he has to say is that's just drama, and I'll
Yeah.
say, yeah, you're right, it is. But
Right.
it's
I have a tendency to exaggerate a little bit in my mind over things. And so lately, the words, let's not make a big deal out of this, has been coming to me more often. I mean, some things are a big deal, and we don't want to deny that. I actually am better with those than the little ones that I can create into a big deal. So
uh,
it's those I'm working on that either something I've done that I'm just embarrassed by, or something that was done to me that is like minuscule. I'm working on the let's not make a big deal about this one.
okay. All right. Well, one that's more contemporary for me, this podcast is now about 3 years old, and it's named The Joyful Friar.
Yeah.
And I do remind people that's Saint Dominic's nickname, not mine. But I did choose it and attach my identity to it. And so sometimes when I'm grouchy, ruminating over some purported offense, I'll find myself wallowing and think, and you call yourself the joyful friar? You're not being very joyful right now. Snap out of it, buddy. But I don't want to stay there, and I know that it takes me into and sadness that takes energy, and
Right.
it,
Right.
like Ellen said, once you move that direction, of course, her issue was horrible, but
Hmm.
nevertheless, whether it's a large or small scale offense, the she didn't so much decide as she said she defaulted or kind of drifted isolation and the denial of feelings and so on. But doing that comes at a cost, and
Yeah.
I don't. And if I'm going to be the joyful friar, I don't want to have to fake it. I don't want to be the half joyful friar. Uh,
Right.
Not if I can be the whole thing. So it
Right.
takes some discipline to call yourself on it and say, you know what? Or I'll do a kind of a prayer of abandonment, like Lord, I can't do this on my own. I'm letting this stick in my craw. I'm letting this thing become more important than it needs to be. Sometimes I'll do it open-handedly and hand it as though it's some nasty thing. Here, is this milk spoiled? You have something nasty that you want to invite someone else into, but I know that the Lord can take care of it and it'll go away, and I don't need to have that in me anymore.
Yeah. I think being a good therapist too is admitting when something's really bothering you or getting in the way of the work or whatever, and then move and then focus on the people that you're working with. And so every once in a while that something will happen, and I find people uh, like it if you're human, and that it gives them strength too. So I'm not really good at hiding things, and so I just say, I'll just admit what's going on, and then we move along.
Well, a large part of my life and work is public preaching at public worship at Catholic masses or retreats and things. And I learned early on to I listened to a lot of preaching because we had daily mass all the way through seminary, and frequently I'm not the preacher, I'm listening to someone else. And when the preacher can let us into their heart and show how they've struggled with a thing, and maybe have some insight about how you might deal with this or what the scriptures
Yeah.
have to say about something, get some insight into the personal struggle of a preacher or speaker. I try to do that regularly. I did it a lot as a campus minister because when you're in campus ministry, your congregation is brand new every 4 years, or the flow is just constant. There's always new people, and so if you want them to know you, you need to tell stories that
Mhm.
are not just you rattling on about your own narrative, but choosing insightful stories that give people a sense of who you are as a full human being,
Yeah.
uh, that can be real helpful. I want to touch upon one more thing before we wrap this up. I had forgotten that Ellen came to help someone else.
Yeah.
Without, we don't disclose too much if we haven't
Mm-mm.
done a permission asking thing, but what do you remember about that?
That was another very difficult, kind of sad story where a young woman was assaulted by a family member. And then the way her family dealt with it, she ended up dying from the way they dealt with it. And this was a very, very long time ago. Um, but, and she was super young, she was probably like late teens. And so uh, the whole time that gal was talking, I just had Ellen in mind, like, can you come and help us? And
That story was like,
it was in April of this year.
no, but I mean this lived experience was a really old story. It was like
It,
Victorian times, wasn't it?
yeah, it was, yeah.
And
It
so,
was one of the really a lot longer than we usually deal with. It was
yeah,
so long ago.
and it had an
Uh,
overlay of more of the kind of repression of anything having to do with sexuality that
right,
part of that era.
right. And Ellen came to help her.
Yeah,
And not only did Ellen come, but a long, very long line. The picture I got in my head was like a V of
yes.
people, of other women who had similar experience, and they were there to help her cross.
We've seen that a number of times. Sometimes, if our audience members can imagine seeing migratory birds flying south for the winter or whatnot, when they're in a V and somebody's out front, uh, or sometimes they've used the example of bowling pins, where there's only one in the front and then they fan out in greater number behind that lead one. That she was out front, was she in that?
She was. Well, in my mind, she was out front.
Well, I mean, but they give us these images.
Yeah. Hmm.
At least that's the way I experience it.
Yeah.
So she not only was healed, but became part of a healing team, which is just a very natural thing once we begin to move towards wholeness. We don't have to be whole and complete in order to be helpful to somebody else along the way.
No, we've learned that, haven't we, through the work?
Yeah.
Right. Uh, it's been such a privilege to work with you and to do this work and to meet people like Ellen. So I want to thank you.
Well,
It's been amazing.
right back at you, sister. It's a wild ride, but it's a joyful one.
Yes.
Has a lot of credits behind her name for the kind of counseling training that she's had, and she's employed that and maybe even augmented it some in the course of the work that we've been doing for several years together, along with our friend Dave.
Yeah.
Right.
Thank you, Father.
Okay. God bless you. So that's this episode of the Joyful Friar. Remember that if you want to be in touch with me or possibly with Karen, you could do that by letting me know, just coming through my website, which is nathan-castle.com. Go to the contact bar in it and preferably a phone number. That knowing what time zone is really helpful because I don't want to be calling you in the middle of the night or something like that. And some of you are overseas. So that's really helpful. I do ask that if you have a question about our process, that you read one of the books first before wanting to know more about that, because a lot of it's well explained in any of the books. And then what I pray for you often, and when I do, I pray for healing at the source of anything that might rob your joy, even if it was long ago and far away or whatever. If there's anything that never really got fully tended and brought into the light of truth, I pray that the Holy Spirit can find its way into the cracks and crevices of your psyche and your whole being, and that healing might grow there, just even without your knowing about it. That there might, you don't have to watch your hair grow or your nails grow; they just grow. I think healing can grow inside of us sometimes if we ask for it. So I ask on your behalf. So I hope you'll join us next time. God bless you. Bye bye.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of The Joyful Friar. Please like, follow, and subscribe. You can visit me at nathan-castle.com. Send me a message by clicking the contact button. God bless. Have you ever had to do something so difficult that you had to deal with it in stages? Imagine dying suddenly with no forewarning, being in a car crash, a shooting, a drowning. You leave your body, but then what? How do you transition into the afterlife? For some, it flows all at once, but not for everybody. For some, the process of transitioning into the afterlife is interrupted. Maybe there's a need for rest or for learning, or maybe just the chance to adjust to such an abrupt experience. I'm Father Nathan Castle. I'm a Catholic priest. About 23 years ago, the Holy Spirit began to send me people who had died traumatically. They entered my dreams during sleep, showing me what had happened to them and asking for help. They had died and moved on, sort of, but they'd come to a moment where it was time to complete the crossing. With the help of the angels and saints and earthly prayer partners, we've assisted more than 300 souls as they complete their crossing. You can read about it in my book series. Afterlife Interrupted books are available on Amazon. You can also learn more by visiting my website, nathan-castle.com. God bless you.